The Broken Blueprint, Part 2, Making a Start. How the work at Madison began. We return now to the early fall of 1904. Edward Sutherland was 39 years old, and Percy Magan was 4 years younger. They had a great challenge ahead of them to turn the Nelson farm into a blueprint school. Ellen White described the proposed program of the new school in the review. The plan upon which our brethren propose to work is to select some of the best and most influential young men and women from Berrien Springs and other places in the North who believe that God has called them to work in the South, and give them a brief training as teachers. Thorough instruction will be given in Bible study, physiology, and the history of our message, and a special instruction in agriculture will be given. It is hoped that many of these students will eventually connect with schools in various places in the South. In connection with these schools, there will be land that will be cultivated by teachers and students, and the proceeds from this work will be used to support these schools. Ellen G. White, Review, August 18, 1904. Notice that the plan called for the students to go out and found more independent ministries. Ellen White concluded the above article with an appeal for our church and its members to help the young school. In a letter to Sutherland and Magan, she wrote, "We greatly desire the prosperity of the work in the South." And concerning Madison School, she declared, "I have every confidence that it was our duty to purchase this land. Let us not worry. The necessary means will be provided." To Sutherland and Magan, she wrote, "We know that you are established in the right place." Ellen White to Sutherland and Magan, July 28, 1904, Second Manuscript Releases, page 205. Elder George I. Butler, President of the Southern Union Conference, with headquarters based in Nashville, was the only church leader who favored the new project. He had formerly been General Conference President, and his influence was a help to some extent. The pioneers called the new institution the Madison School. Ellen White had written a series of special testimonies to the new institution, which she entitled the Madison School. The name fitted. Though practical in all its operations, the school organization was somewhat loose. It consisted of a group of people happily working together to fulfill the blueprint. Elders Butler and Haskell, Ellen White, Percy Magan, Mother D, which is Nellie Juilliard, M. Bessie DeGraw, and Edward Sutherland became known as the Rainbow Seven Pioneers. They formed the organization known as the Nashville Agricultural and Normal Institute, NANI, a holding corporation. They were the trustees of Madison School and the NANI, as the holding corporation was usually referred to. Humble beginnings. They set to work at once to build and operate a school. Students began arriving, and by that fall, 14 were enrolled. Like their teachers, they came without thought of money or worldly advantages. What money they could make was used for living expenses, and their living depended on their making something. Percy Magan, dean of the school, gathered up the reins of the mule team and supervised the farm. Miss M. Bessie DeGraw, secretary of the organization, drove to town once a week in a one-mule cart. Her objective, to market the butter which President Sutherland churned and prepared in the lean-to creamery. The treasurer, Mother Juilliard, laid her hand to the skillet and the broom, and supervised the domestic duties of the institute. Percy Magan frequently drove to Nashville in the cart with a load of fresh produce and eggs, which he peddled from door to door. Magan diary entry, December 9, 1907. Class discussions during the first year centered around making a farm pay, how to bring livestock through the winter, and ways to improve soil cultivation and crop growth. Mother D was the respected head of the big house. Each morning she would swat flies, still stiff from the chilly night. In spite of her background of comfortable affluence, she resolutely provided courage, trust, and economy. No one on the place ever complained. All were happy to have a part of the work. The president helped Elmer Brink, who had charge of the farm duties, while the dean worked in the timber with the boys. Dean Megan wrote to a friend, "I have no stenographer now, and do my own typing." When a man gets up at 4:30 in the morning and works in the field with a team of mules till 1 o'clock and then goes at it again till 6:30 p.m. and then conducts a study for an hour or an hour and a half, takes the responsibility of planning the work for the boys, he is doing a pretty good day's work. And when it is taken into account that this has had to be done on our old and rather worn out land, with a goodly sprinkle of rocks and thorn bushes, and by one who has not followed the farming business since he was 18 years of age, I, at least, find that it has taxed my determination of purpose and capacity to meet and overcome hard problems even more than heading a relief of schools campaign. But the whole has been a good experience, and I feel more genuine iron determination and grim strenuosity in my bones today to take hold of things which need to be done and to do them than I have ever felt in my life before. The hard life and absence of office work has built up my health, and physically, I trust I am a better man than I have been for years. Megan to W.C. White, September 7, 1905. Getting down to basics. The farm's main building, the old plantation house, had been built of cedar logs over 100 years earlier and later covered with siding and plastered inside. Fronted by a wide veranda in the style of southern mansions, it served as the first schoolroom and meeting place by day and provided sleeping quarters at night until other buildings could be erected. Sutherland's work-study program consisted of half the day devoted to study and the other half to labor. Money had to be raised for the buildings, machinery, livestock, and improvements. Some of this came from their well-managed dairy, which provided cash income. Sutherland and Megan knew that the students, coming as they did from poor homes, could not have an education if they had to pay tuition. So no tuition was charged. They had to work their way through school, and their instructors helped them in every way they could. This resulted in an extremely close friendship between the students and the faculty. They all worked together to solve the problems which arose. Each day began with morning worship, as the entire family gathered to sing, pray, and study God's Word. In studying it, they were studying an important part of God's plan of education for them. In those early days, the food was all cooked in one large cast iron pot, probably similar to the great pot one of the schools of the prophets used many years before. 2 Kings 4 verses 38 to 44. As for the meal that first winter, it often consisted of little more than cornmeal mush or grits and skim milk. Hopefully, someone brought in some fresh greens. Otherwise, all that the meal that first winter primarily consisted of was milk protein and carbohydrates. Fortunately, by the next summer, the situation had radically changed. In the evening, after all the day's studies and work had been completed, students and teachers would gather in front of the warmth from the fireplace in the northwest room of the mansion. Sutherland, looking into their faces, would lead out in instruction and conversations on many things, such as knitting, how to poultice trapped hands, and much more. Because they did not have an opportunity to gather in and store much vegetables and fruit that first summer, the first winter was especially difficult. The author suggests that Hubbard squash is one of the best crops which can be planted in the summer. Lay it out one level high on newspapers in a dry attic room, and you will have an abundance of squash for cooking or baking till late March the following year. 1905. Gardens and orchards begin. When spring of 1905 arrived, everyone worked hard to produce a large crop. Gardens were planted. By the middle of March, the farm crew were planting trees for a future orchard. 200 apple and a lot of pear, peach, and plum. Loganberry roots were planted. 1,800 strawberry plants were set out, and melons, squash, and other vegetables were started. Sutherland supervised the student crews, brought the seeds or plants, and directed the spreading of fertilizer. Everyone had to work long hours throughout the summer so that they would have better food and shelter the coming winter. There were also homes to build. A crisis occurred when Rhoda the mule became lame. In order to haul lumber for the new buildings under construction, a wagon and team had to be hired at $2 a day. Stones laying all over the previously neglected grounds provided additional building materials. Work, not sports. You will mention that no mention is here made of team sports or any other sports for that matter. There were none. The students came to Madison to learn how to live, not how to play. They wanted to know how to support themselves while carrying on missionary work at home and overseas. And this is what they were taught. Madison had no athletic field, no baseball diamond, and no football field. There were no competitive sports, because everyone was too busy cooperating in useful work. Think not that this made the situation dull. They all had a great time, and if you think otherwise, you need to try it for yourself. Spend the summer working in the garden, cutting and hauling trees in the forest, and helping to build a house or two. Not only will the satisfaction of accomplishing something worthwhile will bring you deep happiness, but you will learn skills that will help you all your life. In fact, physically you will feel better than you have in years. One of Sutherland's saying was this: our school must not only give the students preparation for life, it must allow them to experience life. And Madison did all that and more. It prepared them to be practical, self-supporting missionaries. Sister White said that in comparing the profit and loss of the manual training department, we should not estimate it upon a mere money basis, but in the light of the judgment. Then this enterprise will appear on the side of gain, not of loss. 13th Annual Session of the SDA Educational Society, Oakland, November 17, 1887. Stating the purpose. The first letterhead of the Nani had several interesting statements printed on it. It is the object in establishing the school to correlate the intellectual, the physical, and the spiritual in education. A strong intellectual course will be offered, including Bible, history, philosophy, and the sciences. The motto being, learn by doing. Students are given an opportunity to support themselves while gaining an education, with a view to making themselves self-supporting Christian laborers when out of school. Nani, first letterhead. That first year, Sutherland and Megan co-authored a brief statement which they published and distributed to would-be donors. It also helped explain the goal of the school. It is the purpose of this new school to demonstrate to young men and women desirous of doing their master's service that they can begin a work for him without the aid of any special equipment and with only the common buildings to be found on most any farm. It is our prayer that this school may be a factor in developing self-reliant, self-supporting missionary work. Those who are found in it do so without the promise or assurance of specific support or a definite salary from any source. Sutherland and Megan, statement dated 1904. A. W. Spalding describes what those early years at Madison were like. The Madison School was born under conditions that approximated those of pioneer days. Their tables were of plank, their dressers of dry goods boxes. Their food was largely restricted to what they had found in their fields and the products of their dairy. This condition of enforced economy, if not exactly their choice, was at least within the plans of the founders. They knew that to train themselves and their students for service to the poor, there was nothing more effective than privation and sacrifice. Not only in the first days of hardship, but throughout its history, their school must be a school of simplicity. The body must be accustomed to hard work and simple diet. The reins of the mind must be girded by self-control and a zealous purpose. The closer the living conditions at the school approached those to be met when students should have become teachers, the more adaptable and efficient would those teachers be. No steam-heated, electrically lighted houses, no intricate and expensive machinery, no wealth of imported foodstuffs were appropriated for the men and women in training for the service to the mountains. A. W. Spalding, Men of the Mountains, page 153. R. W. Squarts provides a one-paragraph summary of the objectives. The vast majority of students coming to Madison expected to be teachers or health workers in rural communities. They studied Bible, history, science, or grammar during the regular 9-week terms. Short 3-week sessions devoted to practical skills like carpentry, cobbling, or blacksmithing were offered between regular terms. The first year, Mrs. Juilliard offered a 1-year course in practical nursing and hydrotherapy. Later, when a sanitarium was added to the school in 1907, this course was lengthened to 2 years. In all subjects, the emphasis was on teaching the student to be proficient enough to teach the same subject matter when he went out on his own. R. W. Squarts, Light Bearers to the Remnant, page 247. Here is another nice summary of the work carried on by Madison. The school at Madison not only educates in a knowledge of the scriptures, but it gives a practical training that fits the student to go forth as a self-supporting missionary to the field to which he is called. In his student days, he is taught how to build, simply and substantially, how to cultivate the land and care for the stock. All these lines are of great educational value. To this is added the knowledge of how to treat the sick and care for the injured. This training for medical missionary work is one of the grandest objects for which any school can be established. If many more students in other of our schools were receiving a similar training, we as a people would become a spectacle to the world, to angels, and to men. The message would quickly be carried to every country, and souls now in darkness would be brought to the light. E.G.W. to those bearing responsibilities in Washington and other centers, January 6, 1908, 11 manuscript releases, pages 192 to 193. Dr. Lillian. Lillian Eshelman was an Iowa school teacher who went to Battle Creek College in 1891. Converted to the faith a few years later, she gradually kept taking additional studies until she not only completed the nurse's course, but by 1900 was a physician. She was particularly expert at giving hydrotherapy treatments. Percy Megan had spent a busy but lonely year since his wife Ida had been laid to rest. when Sutherland and Megan resigned from EMC and journeyed south to found Madison. But on some of his fundraising trips that first school year, he spent a little time getting acquainted with Lillian. One evening he jotted in his diary, "Went for a walk with Elle, who gave her final promise." Megan diary entry, September 30, 1904. One day in early 1905 of September, Ed Sutherland hitched the mule to the milk cart and drove to the railway station to meet Percy and his new wife, Dr. Lillian, for that was what everyone had called her. Sutherland was astounded to find that she gladly accepted the mule ride and expressed cheerful acceptance of her new quarters. Lillian fit in beautifully into this new, difficult way of life. By the fall of 1905, there were a number of small functioning cabins on the place. Each faculty member or family was in a separate cottage. The exception was Percy and Dr. Lillian, who were in one of the upstairs rooms in the mansion. She later recalled that it had no running water, no bathroom, no carpet, and no closed closets. There were kerosene lamps for light and a small wood-burning stove for heat. For decades, the room had been used to store and dry tobacco. Lillian spent several days hauling up buckets of water and washing the odor out of the wood. The couple were anxious to have their own place. In late September, while carpenters did the heavy construction, Percy and Dr. Lillian laid the floors, latted the rooms except the ceilings, and did the sandpapering, painting, and the finishing. Soon their home was completed. More descriptions of the early days. Throughout the property, the first tables were planks laid on sawhorses, their dressers dry goods boxes, and no two chairs or stools were alike. All equally shared in the difficulties and blessings. Everyone worked well together. And, although mistakes were at times made, they learned from them how to keep doing better. It was mutually agreed that each of the faculty would receive a salary of $13 a month and were charged with board, room, laundry, livery hire, etc. At the end of the year, any profit was divided into three parts. 1/3 going to teachers. In 1908, it figured to 12 cents an hour, and the 2/3 used for repairs, improvements, and expansion. By 1918, the faculty members were still receiving $13 a month. In 1912, Megan made a clarifying statement that he and Sutherland needed more money than that per month due to their traveling to raise funds. In addition, both had some property located elsewhere which brought in a little money which helped subsidize their trips. Sutherland believed that two basic principles of the school were to make the students self-sacrificing and self-supporting. If we are to raise up men like the Apostle Paul, he would say, we should teach them to become self-supporting. Another important principle was strict and persistent economy. As the school grew, instead of building large, expensive, well-equipped buildings, the new dwellings were small, simple, and inexpensive. In this way, teachers and students could build them, and the students left the school prepared to develop similar institutions. Another principle was the one study plan. Each student carried just one major subject, and to it he gave 3 hours a day to classwork in that subject and 3 hours to preparation for class. During one term, the students would cover in succession as much work as if 3 or more major studies had been taken simultaneously. Throughout the remaining hours of the day, the work program gave the students instruction and practice in practical work. Each student was gradually rotated from one line of work to another until he received a well-rounded training in the care and management of livestock and poultry, garden and dairy, building construction, and other farm work. Another principle was self-government. Early each fall, Sutherland called the students and teachers together and started a self-governing council. This group, known as the union body, became the legislative arm of the school. Sutherland read the rules which he had earlier copied from a letter by Mother Ellen White. The rules governing the schoolroom should, so far as possible, represent the voice of the school. Every principle involved in them should be so placed before the student that he may be convinced of its justice. Thus, he will feel a responsibility to see that the rules he himself has helped to frame shall be enforced. The union body became one of the strongest single educational features of the school. When students left Madison, they already had practical experience, not only in practical work and book knowledge, but also in governance. The governing body at Madison was not the faculty or a president's council, but the entire school family sitting in session, called the union body. Working together in this group, students and teachers jointly made rules, enforced discipline, planned for needed improvement, and directed the various departments of the school. Only matters requiring cash expenditures were referred to the board of directors. One night each week was set aside for a meeting of the union body. R.W. Squartz, Light Bearers to the Remnant, page 246. A school building was needed, but Sutherland and Megan could never quite collect enough money to build it. Then one day, they decided that the Lord might want them to keep working with what they had. Although conditions were somewhat rough, with classes and assembly meetings in the old mansion during the day and students sleeping there at night, perhaps it was best this way, so the students would be better prepared to deal with the hardships they would encounter upon graduation. In February 1906, a report on the progress of the school was sent by Percy Megan to Ellen White. "We have a splendid class of students, and they are gaining a good experience. 2 of our number have recently gone to Cuba. They will study the language and work with their hands and canvas till they can see some way open to do more. We are endeavoring to train workers in the simple things of the third angel's message. We teach them the Bible, physiology and hygiene, the English language, church history, the keeping of accounts, and how to give simple treatments. We are planning that no girl shall leave our school who is not a good cook, and able to make her own clothes, and do simple nursing for the relief of the sick. We endeavor to have each one have an experience in canvassing our books. To some, these things do not look like an education at all. They think our school is cheap and we should pay more attention to the things of the world taught in books, to Latin and Greek and the like. Well, I have taught a good many years now in this cause, and I have seen but little good come out of this so-called higher education. Lately, we have been following a new plan which our life in the country makes feasible. We can buy 3 cows for $100, and the butter which we get from the 3 cows will support a boy in school for a year. We own the cows, but our students do the work of milking, butter making, and caring for them. In this way, we are able to support them in school without any loss to ourselves, and the cows and their increase from a perpetual endowment for the benefit of the students in the school. God is teaching us many lessons of economy. We have exceedingly little to do with, but that is all the better, as it makes us all, both teachers and students, careful of every little thing that we do have. Besides, it will give our students a solid training in poverty and hardship and self-denial, which will be invaluable to them when they go out into the work. I long to see noble men and women go forth from our schools, inured to hardship and toil, and afraid to go nowhere on earth where they may be called in their master's service. Megan to Ellen White, February 1, 1906. The visit of several leaders to Madison in January 1908 will be mentioned shortly. Just now, we want to quote part of Elder W. C. White's official report of that visit, which included an interesting description of Madison in early 1908. It was my privilege to accompany Elder A. G. Daniels and Professor Griggs on their visit to Madison earlier in January. We made a very full and thorough inspection of the place. We saw the pasture lands, the rich bottomlands, the orchard, the garden, the dairy, and the poultry yards. We inspected the stables, the farm implements, the creamery, and the kitchen. We ate with the school family in the big dining rooms of the old log mansion house, and then visited the cottages where the students lodge. We were impressed with the thrifty appearance of the farm and the Spartan simplicity of the board and lodgings. Afterward, we met with the students and teachers in the modest cottage with one big room, which they use as an assembly hall, and had a 2-hour conference with them over questions of preparation for service. When this conference was ended, we met with the teachers in one of the cottages and heard the story of the beginning of the work, some of the struggles, the failures and victories experienced in mastering the work of the farm and improving the dairy. Also, the plans, efforts, and successes in gathering means with which to build the dozen or more cottages, and of the plans for establishing a small sanitarium in harmony with special counsel given them in numerous testimonies of instruction. W. C. White, the Nashville Agricultural and Normal Institute, Report of Plan of Organization and Workings, Spring 1908. Here is a description of the first nursing instruction at Madison. The first class in nursing consisted of 5 girls who received instruction from Mother D in a primitive treatment room in the old plantation house. Hydrotherapy, massage, bed making, handling of patients, and the principles of a healthful diet were covered in the course. Merlin Neff, For God and CME, page 145. Why is nutrition, hydrotherapy, and obedience to the 8 laws so crucial? Proper food and attention to the 8 laws build the body. Water therapy brings the blood to and from the afflicted part and heals the body. The life is in the blood, Leviticus 17 verse 11. It is not in poisonous compounds. For the 8 laws of health, see her 1905 book, Ministry of Healing, pages 117, paragraph 2, and read pages 126 to 128. The chapter was written to physicians and health educators. In 1906, Ellen White wrote, I fully believe that those who are connected with the school at Madison are carrying out the will of God. Ellen G. White, letter dated October 30, 1906, in the Madison School. Preparing for the Sanitarium. In the summer of 1906, Ellen White visited Madison. Delighted at her arrival, the faculty and students arranged a picnic. While they all sat eating lunch on a beautiful wooded slope just west of the school buildings, Mother White, as she was affectionately known to them, said, this would be a good spot for a sanitarium. Silence fell on everyone. No one answered her, but they all heard her words. The picnickers continued to pass the food. Then Mother White spoke again. You say you have no money, but you need to have faith. She looked around at them all, and each one felt the weight of that look. Do you have faith anymore? Get your people together, and get a horse, and mark out the site, even though you don't have money to begin. Everyone was stunned. But when they finished their picnic lunch, they all hurried to their little chapel, knelt and prayed together. Then they got a mule, hitched him to a plow, and marked out the spot where the sanitarium would be built. Not long after Ellen White went back to California, a tired and ailing businessman from Nashville stopped by one day. "I have heard that you folk give treatment for the sick and furnish them a healthful diet. Will you let me come here and try to get well?" Said Mother Juilliard, "we are not quite ready for that yet." But the man would not be so put off. So Mother D screened off the corner of the plantation house porch. Then, with her usual determination and skill, she and her 3 nursing students helped him so much that he recovered his health, went back to Nashville, and spread the work that the folk out at Madison get people well. This meant they had to get to work and build something. The first sanitarium consisted of a small cottage with a capacity for 11 beds and had treatment rooms opening onto a porch. Kerosene lamps lighted the place and a wood stove heated it. Kettles and pots set on top of the stove provided water for hydrotherapy treatments. The treatment table consisted of a wide board on 2 sawhorses. Soon the elite of Nashville were wending their way to this little place out in the country. Here they found not only physical restoration, but Christian warmth and the love of Christ. First, a cottage was built for a sanitarium in the grove which Mrs. White at the first pointed out, saying, "This would be a good place for a sanitarium." So it grew and grew until it became the fourth in size and equipment of all the Seventh-day Adventist sanitariums in America. A.W. Spalding, Christ's Last Legion, page 171. Progress in 1907. The year 1907 was a difficult one. Drought hit the entire area and greatly reduced the summer harvest. However, in spite of many difficulties, under Megan's supervision, work on a larger sanitarium building continued while Sutherland went to the West Coast to raise money. When the sanitarium was completed, Dr. Newton Evans joined the group and became the first medical superintendent of the institution. Gradually, they were to keep enlarging it. Later that year, Megan expressed their objective in these words: "We have toiled and struggled against a great many difficulties during the last 4 years. We have felt that we were willing to pass through these hard experiences if we could only see the fulfillment of the testimonies concerning Christian education and the self-supporting missionary work by the lay members." Megan to W.C. White, December 3, 1907. Leaders visit Madison. In February 1907, Ellen White wrote this to the leadership of the Southern Union Conference: "There is need of such an institution as has been established near Nashville, and let not one endeavor to hinder the attendance of those who can at that school best receive the training that will fit them to labor in the Southern states and in other mission fields." EGW to Southern Union Conference Committee, February 24, 1907. In January 1908, delegates of the Southern Union Conference assembled in Nashville. While there, they heard reports of the plans and activities of the NANI, Nashville Agricultural and Normal Institute, still the official name of Madison at that time. Suspicion against Madison continued to be strong in many minds for 4 reasons: Madison's ownership, management, curriculum, and support. To put it into a word, it was independent. But before the conference began, word was suddenly received at Madison that some important visitors were about to arrive. A.G. Daniels, W.C. White, G.W. Irwin, M.E. Kern, and Fred Griggs. We have several descriptions of what happened. We have already quoted part of Elder W.C. White's official report, which provided an interesting description of Madison in early 1908. Here is part of Elder Haskell's report. He was still president of NAMI's boards of trustees. The school is yet in its infancy, but the instructors are seeking in all things to follow the light that God has given and are actually demonstrating the utility of returning to the original plan of education. Already there is a marked change in the farm under their cultivation. It is the object of this school to give the students an education which shall make them efficient in all useful employments such as carpentry, farming, dairying, poultry raising, gardening, etc., as well as in the knowledge obtained from books and to do self-supporting work in any field to which they are called. At present, there are but few schools where the value of manual trainings is emphasized as a means of self-support. S.N. Haskell, Report of the President of NAMI, Spring 1908. 1908, Discussions with Leadership. Lastly, we shall take a peek at Megan's private diary notations, reprinted with all its unusual abbreviations, initial caps, and all the rest. These diary entries tell an intriguing story. January 3, EAS recorded letter from Homer Salisbury from Washington tell that H.E. Rogers, the statistical secretary of the General Conference, had told him that the reason Nani was not listed in the 1907 yearbook was because the leaders had told him that we were independent, got our own money, and made no report to an organized body. January 5 recorded word that Daniels, W.C. White, Irwin, Kern, and Griggs would arrive Nashville tomorrow. January 7 held a council and prayer meeting at Mrs. Juilliard's preparatory to the arrival of Elder Daniels, White, etc. Went to Madison with the old mayor and Mrs. Lenker's rig and met them. White and Griggs pleasant, Daniels very distant. After dinner, took them all over the premises. Daniels did not seem much impressed with the place. Thought it, I judge, pretty tough looking. In the evening, Daniels spoke to the school. Very stiff at first, but God laid hold of him and warmed him up. Finally, he prayed for the nanny. Afterwards, M.B. DeGraw told him she was glad he at last could pray for the school. January 8. Churned cream to make butter. Griggs spoke at worship and said nothing. Recess and White spoke. Then a general meeting in which members of the school spoke of hopes and desires. Read the work. Then Daniels, White, Griggs, Juilliard, DeGraw, Megans, Sutherlands met at Mrs. Lenker's for conference, talked the South first, and opened their eyes to real conditions. After dinner, NHD Juilliard read them financial statement, but little clashing and another meeting promised. January 13, meeting in Nashville. EAS, DeGraw, NHD, and I all gave reports of Nani. The reports took the house. They were the feature of the day. EAS drew one chorus after another of amens. I read the famous Whitman letter, the charter. EAS returned to Madison. Marcus Whitman, 1802 to 1847, was a famous American Presbyterian pioneer, physician, and missionary among the Indians in the Oregon Territory. He established 2 mission schools, one near the site of the present city of Walla Walla. His group experienced many hardships and in 1847 were slain by Cayuse Indians, provoked to the act by Jesuit missionaries working with French traders. January 14, Will White notified me that a committee on investigation of our charter was wanted. Also, he wanted a list of our needs to place before the conference. I phoned EAS to return. He came in on the 9:50 a.m. Antinel, Mr. Graw, EAS, and I had a talk, read the situation. January 15. In an open conference, I moved that Judge Simmons, W. H. Wilcox, and F. Briggs be a committee to investigate our charter, etc. House thought it would be insult to us. Made them vote it. EAS had long talk with Fred Griggs, re old troubles, etc. Griggs saw we had the W.B. White crowd in a hard place. January 16. Met Elder G.W. Irwin and K.C. Russell, who had arrived night before. Found Brother Griggs had gone. Got K.C. Russell to act on committee on investigation of Nani in his place. Judge Simmons, A.W. Wilcox, K.C. Russell, accompanied by self, went to courthouse. Examined deed to property and charter unanimously. Bolland quibbling a little as usual. At 11:30 again, at 2:30, Committee on Plans with EAS and PTM present met. WCW called Daniels to speak re status of Madison School and relative to conference. AGD, considering our organization, should continue untrammeled. That there should be corporation. Offered peace. We accepted. January 19. Talked over reconciliation with the General Conference. April 20 to 26. In Washington. Talks with Daniels and others. He very friendly and sincere. Met with committees, etc. Megan diary entries. January 3 to 8, 13 to 16, 19, and April 20 to 26, 1908. Madison was a special school. It was training workers for mission fields, both in America and overseas. As the graduates went out from it, the plan was that some would support themselves while working for souls. Still others would start new Madisons elsewhere and multiply the training process. The plan of leadership in all ages is that everything operate in an orderly manner, with each level of operation subservient to another. The Madison plan was multiplication of trained laymen to go out, convert, and multiply still more workers. Here is part of the letter that Ellen White had her son read to the assembled delegates at the above Nashville meeting. Brethren Sutherland and Megan are chosen of God and faithful, and the Lord of heaven says of them, I have a special work for these men to do at Madison, a work of educating and training young men and women for mission fields. The Spirit of the Lord will be with his workers if they will walk humbly before him. He has not bound about and restricted the labors of these self-denying, self-sacrificing men. EGW, message to the delegates at attending Southern Union meeting at Nashville, January 6, 1908. Many years later, in recalling those days at Madison, Megan wrote this to Warren Howell. From Berrien Springs, some of us, as you know, went down to Madison, Tennessee by the counsel and advice of Ellen White. Do not think I am imparting information to you when I state that as far as the principles and plans which in an educational way govern in the Nashville Agricultural Normal Institute are concerned, they have never been very kindly received by the leaders in this denomination. I have letter after letter in my old files ridiculing our work there, styling it cheap, fanatical, etc. I am ready to grant that the educational work there is not perfect, and undoubtedly in many respects is very faulty, but I do believe that the fundamental ideas are in the main right, and that God has blessed the efforts far beyond our own sanguine expectations. Percy T. Megan, letter to Warren Howell, January 13, 1926. Unfortunately, the peace treaty of 1908 would eventually end. 1909 General Conference Session. The 1909 General Conference session was held on May 13th through June 6th. Sutherland traveled to it while Meighan remained at Madison. But then, on June 4, Meighan received a telegram telling him to immediately come to Washington. The next day, he boarded a train for Tacoma Park Station. The plan was to get Meighan to move to the General Conference and become Secretary of the Negro Work, a new department invented so they could put him in charge of it. Haskell met him at the train and told him not to do it. On June 8, he met with Daniels and other high-level leaders and declined their offer. His diary entry for that day was significant. June 8, met Daniels, Olsen, Westwork, McVa, et al. They laid their plan before me. I declined. Talk with Sister White, who told me not to bring my family to Washington. She told me that they have separated themselves from you and you from themselves. There will be a division. Meighan diary entry for June 8, 1909. The plan was to get Meighan, an important fundraiser, out of Madison, so the work there would be weakened and eventually fold. The previous year, the General Conference had sent him an urgent call to become superintendent of the Korean mission. As she usually did, Ellen White followed up her conversation that same day with a letter, not only to Meighan, but also to Sutherland. I am instructed to say to you, be careful as to what moves you now make. You need now to be careful that you do not take one step in a path where he is not going before you and guiding you. You should not leave your present field of labor unless you have clear evidence that it is the Lord's will for you to do so. EGW to Sutherland and Meighan, June 8, 1909, Unpublished Testimonies, page 447. She also added this: we hear much of the higher education as the world regards the subject, but those who are ignorant of the higher education as it was taught and exemplified in the life of Christ are ignorant of what constitutes the higher education. Higher education means working together with Christ. By pen and voice, labor to sweep back the false ideas that have taken possession of men's minds regarding the higher education. Higher education means conformity to the terms of salvation. The above warning was almost prophetic. It would only be a few years before the thought would come strongly to Meighan to leave Madison for what he thought was an important work somewhere else. 1911 to 1950 diary entries. Between 1911 and 1915, we find several significant entries in Meighan's diary. They reveal that not everyone valued the Spirit of Prophecy counsels, and that the peace made in 1906 had later evaporated. In 1911, A.G. Daniels said something very significant to Meighan. January 2, EAS arrived from Chicago, told me had met Daniels who is sick. Daniels spoke at Dr. David Paulson's City Rescue Mission, the lifeboat mission in Chicago, and slept there. Daniels don't believe people should get out of the cities. Meighan, diary entry, January 2, 1911. It was clear that even oft-repeated Spirit of Prophecy counsels did not bear much weight on him. In 1913, Meighan met with several physicians and high-ranking church leaders in Nashville. February 6. After listing those who were present, charges preferred versus against the EAS re-article in Lifeboat, Paulson's Chicago Journal on Organization. White fears a kingdom within a kingdom. White has suspicioned us not being true to organization. White said there was no place for us to conduct a school within the denomination. Says leading educators criticize our work. Accused EAS of belittling Berrien Springs and Graysville, a Tennessee Conference Academy. Don't like our conventions. We accused him and General Conference of violating their pact made at the last General Conference. His Wisconsin speech. His telling Waller that we were of the devil and testimonies no good. Megan, diary entry, February 6, 1913. November 26. I went downtown and met Elder W.C. White at Prodo Hotel. He told of storm brewing verses against us at Washington. Charge against M.B. DeGraw getting students illicitly at Berrien. EAS heretical teachings, my salary, etc. Left at noon. Megan, diary entry, November 26, 1913. February 28, Madison. EAS recorded letter from F.M. Wilcox stating that no notices re Madison could appear in the Review and Herald. Megan, diary entry, February 28, 1915. The problem of Madison came up again at the 1915 Autumn Council. In the preamble to the recommendations voted by the General Conference, some of the problems were stated. Since the Nashville Agricultural and Normal Institute, Madison, and the rural schools affiliated with it were not under direct conference control and management, the question naturally arose as to their relation to the organized work. The two chief causes of friction were listed. First, the teachings given, or said to have been given, in them relative to organization and conference work, and second, the manner in which the funds for their establishment and maintenance were secured. Merlin Neff, For God and CME, page 177. Sanitarium work enlarges. The folk at Madison hoped that the opposition from leaders at Washington was past, and were thankful for it. At about that time, a smallpox epidemic struck the students' body, brought in by two new students from the Dakotas. Dr. Lillian immediately contacted the county health officers and, setting to work with two nurses, brought 8 cases through without the loss of one. The physicians in Nashville were deeply impressed. Soon more people were coming to Madison. Cottage after cottage was constructed, providing more room for expansion of their sanitarium facilities. By 1910, Sutherland felt that the school was doing much better. It had made outstanding advances in the 6 years since its founding, and Doctors Newton Evans and Lillian Megan were doing a good work. At this juncture, Sutherland and Megan began to think seriously of something Kellogg had told them they should do in earlier years at Battle Creek.